So as we move from the subject from global security to global economy, let's begin by talking about the history of global economic relations. And when we talk about that, we really mean the history of global capitalism. So let's begin by looking at Europe, because really it's in Europe where we see the expansion of the global economy. Going back to the 16th century, European powers were really focused on a subject we call mercantilism, a policy we call mercantilism, that would suggest that they are trying to seek new sources for export, while at the same time protecting their own markets and their own internal economies so that they could expand their wealth. Now, the focus here really is on production of goods and the trade of those goods. And this is closely intertwined with the Industrial Revolution at that time in Europe, where new technologies were emerging, new ways to produce goods, new ways to export those goods and ship them around the world. To facilitate the production of goods and the trade in these goods, countries began to develop various laws, policies, and regulations, things like tariffs and taxes and quotas, in order to facilitate this process, in order to facilitate and enhance global relations, the expansion of wealth, and of course the expansion of power. At this time, there were also philosophers and thinkers, people that were helping us really understand global economic relations. For example, Adam Smith wrote in the 18th century the book Wealth of Nations. And in this book, he talks to us about the invisible hand. He's talking about how the market helps regulate the movement of goods and services in a way that it produces the most good for the most people. So as states and governments are seeking to enhance their own wealth and their own power in the economic system, that invisible hand of the market helps us understand how the activity of trade helps to benefit the most throughout society. Another key factor in the history of global economic relations is colonialism. Colonialism was a process by which major powers, European powers, sought new markets and new sources of raw materials that they could have access to in order to produce goods and sell them back at home at a higher rate, therefore creating wealth. Colonialism, therefore, is a really important aspect of the history of global economic relations. The practice of colonialism continued until the early 20th century in the First World War, when major European powers engaged in that global war. That was very destructive, it was very disruptive, and it was very damaging to the global economic system. Of course, following on the heels of that came the Great Depression. That really gives us an indication of how the global economy was very connected, given that the Great Depression occurred first in the United States and spread throughout Europe. So following on the footsteps of the Great Depression comes, of course, the Second World War. And it's at that time, following the Second World War, when we really see global financial institutions begin to change, begin to shape in a different direction, and it's that subject to which we're going to turn next.